Hi, everybody. It's the Plant-Based Business Hour. I'm live from the Good Food Conference. It's Elysabeth Alfano. This time, joining me in San Francisco at GFC, Good Food Conference, is general partner of Alwyn Capital, Heather Courtney. Heather, I have known for a very long time, a major investor in the alternative protein space, and yet I believe this is the first time you've ever been on the Plant-Based Business Hour.
It is. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you for coming with me, and I'm sort of amazed after all these years that I've known you and how much Heather helped me in the beginning to invest in the space. I can't believe it's taken this long, so thank you.
You're very welcome, and I'm pleased to be here.
So wonderful. So we are going to talk about Alwyn Capital, and if you don't know them, alwyncapital.com. You can see that right at the bottom of this video, so please go ahead and check them out. We will get to Alwyn Capital and the major things that they're doing in the space, but first, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about this conference and, of course, what is going on around this conference, like the Wired article that recently came out. So please tell me, what are your takeaways from the Good Food Conference in San Francisco?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of talk of community building, consortium building. I know that you went to that panel yesterday. There was a really great panel that Marika from GFI held, kind of brought together thought leaders from the culinary space, so chefs, people that are actually going to be serving us food, talking about how to build partnerships between food tech and food culture, which I think has been really important. So I think the overall kind of sense from this conference has been that we've hit some road bumps in the overall all protein space, but there's reason for optimism, and there's even more reason to build partnerships across multiple different sectors of the food industry.
Mm-hmm. So for those listening to this podcast, audio or video here on LinkedIn, you know that we talk about this a lot, that there are other stakeholders besides the consumer packaged goods companies or the consumers. There's governments and there's even industry players like meat companies and other strategics that are all looking to shift the global food supply system, albeit they don't do it for the same reasons. They're all doing it at the same time because they're either interested in food insecurity like governments, or they're interested in cleaning up their bottom line or the sustainability footprints like strategics, or they're interested in better for the planet options for consumers, which would be consumer packaged goods companies. But there are, in the Venn diagram of life, there are overlaps between all of these. And I love what you're saying about that connection and possible partnership in the food tech industry. Maybe if you can talk about that a little bit more from what you learned this morning.
So I think that one thing that, we've talked a lot about what we have, the challenges that we're facing as a food system. But one of the things that I think a lot of all protein providers or companies have maybe missed the boat on a little bit is that, at the end of the day, you're serving a food product, which is by and large consumers are cultural, right?
Yes.
So I think that the point that the chefs were making yesterday is to remember that and think about that as your North Star at the end of the day. I'm a biochemist by training originally, and I get very caught up in the details. My partner at Alwyn, Robert, tells me this all the time. You have to remember big picture first, right? So big picture first, it's got to be tasty, it's got to be priced right, it's got to be convenient, like GFI has been telling us for years. But I think we also have to kind of remember that there's a cultural component to food choices, and we can't forget that.
Mm-hmm. And so when you say there's a cultural component, you mean you want to make Mexican versions and Thai versions, or what do you mean about playing into people's culture?
I think that it's about culture. It's choice. It's what you've grown up with.
Yes.
Yesterday, the point was made that there's 2 degrees of weirdness, right? You can have something that's like a granola bar that is familiar, but it's got a completely different flavor profile than anything you've ever met before, right? Like it's, green tea and cardamom. Mm-hmm. Who wants, nobody's ever heard of that, but that's 1 degree of weirdness. So you've got something that you recognize and something that is completely unrecognizable in that form, but in that way, it seems familiar. So people make food choices based on what they know, what they've grown up with. Parents traditionally have fed their kids food that they're familiar with. And I think that one thing that parents now are focusing on is making their children more experimental in food choices. And I think that if we, as an industry, in the alt protein industry, want to capture part of that, is that we have to remember there's a starting point. So, yes, we are making plant-based proteins into animal counterparts that people are familiar with, like a chicken breast or a nugget or a beef burger or something like that, but we haven't quite reached the tipping point of remembering why people reach for those foods.
Okay.
So I think that remembering where the consumer really picks up your product and why they make that choice is important.
And the switch of saying, hey, this is just like your burger or just like your mac and cheese is more profound than just there's an orange sauce on top of the mac and cheese. I mean, it has to taste much better, and that taste and texture really has to be there. We've always known that, and we always know that there's comfort in food, even high-end foods. I mean, there's just a recognition in those foods, but we're still missing the mark in so many ways. In some ways, I feel a little bit like, tell me if you have this experience, it might just be me, but some of the food is going backwards. I sort of remember the food tasting better a year ago than some of the things I had here at the conference. How about you? Did you have anything that you loved?
I had a couple things that I really loved. I'm a huge fan of mushrooms.
Yes.
So I had a few mushroom dishes that I thought were really incredible. Yeah. I've tried a lot of different stuff. I've been vegan for 27 years. So it's very hard for me to
remember. You are not the market.
I am not the market. Yes. I'm very well aware of that. But I mean, look at where we started in this industry. If you told me 27 years ago that we'd have burgers that bleed and things that really look and feel and cook like meat, I would have thought that it was science fiction. And in a lot of ways, I think as an industry, we've forgotten how far we've come.
Yes.
We have scale up we have to tackle. We have, there's a lot of things to still be worked out. But I think that it's okay for us to take a moment and sort of appreciate the fact that we've gotten as far as we have.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I mean, I didn't love Eden soy. I love a lot of the alternative milks that are on the market now.
Yes. Yeah. I agree with Heather, what she's saying. I mean, 5 years ago, we didn't have shelf space in grocery stores. No one was even talking about it. Now, some of that press might be negative press, but they're talking about it. They didn't even register it before. And I'm not saying I want negative press. I'm just saying that, we have come so far into the cultural zeitgeist as we talk about that cultural conversation that people now think of it as a counterbalance. Do I want plant-based or do I want meat? Okay, maybe they're still choosing meat, but they're now actually cognizantly making the choice. Do I want plant-based or not? And that's a huge step.
Can you remember 10 years ago walking into a restaurant and being able to know that there was at least something that was a vegan option on the menu?
That would be a no.
Right. So, I mean, we went to a burger place in San Francisco and there was a vegan bacon cheeseburger on the menu.
Oh my gosh.
I would never have happened 10 years ago.
Shout out to them. Who is this?
It's Rome Burger.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm there.
It was great. It was fantastic.
Oh my gosh, never did I think I would crave a bacon cheeseburger, but make it vegan, baby, and I am there.
At 11 o'clock in the morning?
Yes, I'll still do it. I'm there, yes. Okay, so there's some of the challenges have not changed. It's just we don't have a booming economy behind us to say, like, I will give you wiggle room to get it wrong. So no wiggle room to get it wrong anymore, no extra cash to play around with to see if you can get it right. So many of the challenges indeed really haven't changed. Got to nail that taste, got to nail the texture, got to nail the cultural component, and got to scale up. What have you learned, if anything, new about the scale up challenges or advancements?
I think that looking at automation as from day one is really going to be important. We have a portfolio company that has built that into their model. I think that thinking about it in that way is a really smart way to start building a business early. If you focus on the R&D and get the product right from the beginning, and then worry about how you're going to get to price parity or scale up later, you're losing opportunity to really build that into your model early. So automation is key, I think, especially when we look at price and manufacturing. And I think that, so, we were talking earlier about advancements in particular, cheese, right? So we've seen some really cool stuff with cheese recently, like precision fermentation casing that we never thought that we would see on the market.
Yes.
I never thought that I would have a piece of cheese that really stretches.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, so yes, we're not there at scale, but it's still revolutionary in the way that, we've got products on the market that actually are ready for consumption.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I see, talking about perhaps bright spots, maybe before we hit the Wired article, I see money flowing into the space very quietly, not from VCs, but from strategics, granted, buying up acquisitions at pennies on the dollar, but they're spending because they see a future in plant-based, and I'm seeing governments look at the same long-term perspective. So when you look at investors that want short-term perspective, I know this from my work on Wall Street with VegTech Invest and our ETF, there's a short-term mindset, but food is a long-term play. Ultimately, the food industry is $8 trillion. You don't turn that around in 12 months. The meat industry is $1.4 trillion. You don't turn that around in 12 months. And remember, we have to turn the car while we're driving it. We have to change the food system while we continue to feed people. Apologize for the noise in this conference hall. So, obviously this is a long-term play, and I do see players that can be in this space long-term, so not startups, but legacy food industry players that have been around for 100 years. They have advertising budgets, they have distribution channels, they have huge global teams. If there's a recession, they barely even feel it. I do see these critical pillar-like players understanding the long-term benefits. What are you seeing for any timing in this space, Heather?
Timing from buy-in from strategics?
Timing for really scaling. I don't know if you were part of Catherine Tubbs, if you were in the audience for Catherine Tubbs' presentation. Then maybe I'll take it from here. Catherine Tubbs, and I talk about her research a lot on this show, she was comparing the S-curve adoption of alternative proteins to the adoption of electric vehicles, really talking about when electric vehicles came down in price. I'm so sorry for the noise, everybody, and I forgot my main microphone, so you're probably having trouble hearing us. We'll talk a little louder for the computer microphone. So different than, a little bit similar to electric vehicles. When the price came down in batteries, electric vehicle adoption went up, and she states that electric vehicles are now at a tipping point, and that is something that will just continue to grow, but at more rapid pace. Then she predicts the tipping point of alternative proteins to follow the same electric vehicle curve, and so you're still looking at about 10 years. I'm wondering if that resonates with you, that in 10 years we might have critical adoption, which would be 10%, and that's considered tipping point.
That's only if we have strategic buy-in, though. I mean,
Yes.
If you look at the electric vehicle industry, they invested billions to reach, billions in revenue, right? So we need the same buy-in for this industry, and it's unreasonable to think that venture capital funds can be the only ones that will fuel this. For scale, we've really got to see, JBS, Tyson, Purdue, all of them that have those budgets. We need them to come into this space and really revolutionize the food system. They're protein providers. They don't have to be animal protein providers that come from slaughtered animals. It can come from biotechnology.
Mm-hmm. And you see that with companies like Cargill that have changed their name from a meat company to a protein company. Ultimately, and this is an off-the-record interview that I've had with C-suite there, they don't care what they sell. They just want to sell food and make money. That's what they do, is they sell food and they make money, period. So, of course, you can't sell food that doesn't taste good. So that part of the equation doesn't go away. But everyone gets the long-term goal and has their eye on the prize there. So I agree. We need lots of capital in the space, but it won't just come from venture capital, and it won't just be the startups that do it. I will say, though, because of my work with VegTech Invest, yes, JBS, Maple Leaf, Cargill, these meat companies are important. But you can invest in good actors as well. There's Givaudan and Ingredion and Sensient and Ginkgo Bioworks. And there are many positive players that are focused specifically on plant-based proteins. They're not focused on legacy at all. Like, JBS, obviously, 99.9% of their revenue is still in meat. So it's uncomfortable to invest in them. There are good players that you can invest in that are not focused on meat and are only focused on plant-based proteins and shifting the global food supply system very quickly. So a little side note to that. So now going back to the good, the bad, and the ugly, what about that Wired article?
Ooh, what about it? It was scandalous. No, it wasn't scandalous. These are all things that the industry, there's some growing pains. I mean, Uma from Upside even came out and said, that we've got some stuff to figure out. And I think that that's accurate. They took a product to market. They got FDA approval. It is purchasable in a restaurant. You can eat it. I think, again, that's a win. Do we have things to work out in the industry as far as scale up and getting to mass adoption? We do. But I think that the simple fact that it's a proof of concept, and they're working on it, and I think for a company like Upside, we, give them a little bit of grace, give them some time. We've got this.
So I'll take maybe a more critical, harsh standpoint on the press. The press makes their money by being contrarian, but I guess I would throw it back to the press and say, well, then what else you got? Because if you do not address animal agriculture's 32% of the world's global methane emission, if you do not address that methane number, you will not address climate change. So what else you got? If you don't think alternative proteins is going to do it, it can't do it just on fossil fuel. That's mathematically not possible. So what are you going to do? So if you don't, it's easy to sit back and criticize, but then what's your solution for, no one's doing this because they don't like the taste of burgers. If the world was fine with burgers, we'd keep burgers. That will not be the case. That is not an option. You cannot keep burgers and keep the planet. You're going to have to choose. So if you choose to keep the planet, then you're going to have to figure out the burger and the chicken wing and the ribs and the rest of it. So you're going to have to solve for it. So it's easy to criticize, but then what else you got? Because the problem remains there. I'll let you add anything you'd like to add before we dive into Alwyn Capital.
I think as an industry, maybe this is a lesson. So the Wired article might be a lesson for us, right? We think that we're transparent. We think that we're using the right language. Perhaps we need to be overly transparent. Perhaps we need to use multiple different forms of communication. So I think that maybe we can use this as a learning moment. And yes, the press is always looking for a juicy story, and as an industry, we have to be ready for that. But I think it's important to, we've got global greenhouse gas emissions that we are trying to tackle, and we are not going to grow another planet. So we are on a time crunch, right? We've got to figure this stuff out. But at the same time, I think that we need to give ourselves just a little bit of wiggle room.
Yes, because innovation takes time, and it's scientific method, which means through experimentation. If we all had the answers, then we wouldn't have global warming. Now, would we? Okay, so I throw it over to Alwyn Capital. Tell me what you guys are working on now, and even if you can't talk about that specifically, tell me about your goals with Alwyn Capital.
Yeah, I mean, we are trying to dismantle traditional animal agriculture in any way that we can. So we've got 3 focuses for our investment fund. The first one is alternative protein, which is why we're here. The second one is next-gen materials, which is focusing on replacements for leather, silk, and wool. And the third is alternatives to animal testing, because by and large, 96% of drugs fail out of clinical trials because animals are not very good predictors of human biology and physiology, as we have found. So we're looking at a whole system solution that animals aren't very good machine parts. They aren't very good producers. We think that biotechnology will create better solutions for us to create healthier people, healthier planet, and of course it will be healthier for the animals.
Again, I apologize for the recent noise. People have just gotten out of their sessions at the Good Food Conference here in San Francisco. I will say that I love your approach, that it is more than food. It's food and materials. At VegTech, we see this as kind of a hedge, if you will. So if you're making less beef, you're making less leather, both are going to follow these mass adoption curves as we choose to be more sustainable. Just think of a leather tannery and you can immediately see why you'd want to replace that environmental nightmare. So I love that there are those 2 things, and you have animal experimentation. I talk about this a lot on Wall Street with our ETF at VegTech Invest, helping people understand animals are awful business equations. They're inefficient. They take time, land, water, deforestation, eutrophication, the dirtying of our water system. Where do 80 billion animals go to the bathroom? They go to the bathroom in your land and water. All of this external costs put on the taxpayer, often not paid by the meat industry themselves. But these are costs we pay as a society because animals are awful business equations. So when you have an awful business equation, you have disruption for a better business equation. And when there is disruption, money is to be made. That's why Alwyn Capital's here. That's why Wall Street should be focused on this as well. So anything exciting with Alwyn Capital that you can talk about? I know you've got something out there that you're not ready to disclose, but maybe you're seeing a kind of company that you love or a kind of innovation. Or is there anything that Alwyn Capital is sinking their teeth into?
Well, the thing that we're probably the most excited about, top of mind right now, is that Robert just went to a tasting for New School Foods last night, which was incredible. Whole cut salmon, really, really great. I saw the pictures. I sadly could not go, but I hear it was delicious. So that's a platform technology that is creating whole cut pieces of fish, can be used, probably for other species as well. but it's an alternative to high moisture extrusion. So now not only do we have multiple proteins in the market, but we will have multiple manufacturing technologies in the market. And we're really excited about that.
Yes, manufacturing. Really, it's how we scale up. And so finding these alternatives and smarter ways of creating new foods that ultimately we have to solve for this equation. Everyone, you've heard me say it, we have to feed more people. A growing population going from 8 million to 10 billion according to the United Nations. We have to feed more people more nutritiously, using fewer resources in a shorter amount of time, traveling shorter distances while creating less damage. That means scaling up novel manufacturing technologies and nailing that taste. And then we will show those wired people that it is just uncool to be so cynical, even if it is a learning moment. Okay, Heather.
So I have my marching orders
yes,
now.
you do. Yes, you know what to do.
Yes.
I want to thank Heather Courtney, not just for all that she does with Alwyn Capital and her partner, Robert Dupree, what they do with Alwyn Capital. I want to thank you for all the work that you've done helping entrepreneurs and startups and founders and Glasswell Syndicate. Your work in the industry precedes you, if you will, because you have such a wake before you and behind you because of all that you do. So I really want to thank you, Heather Courtney of Alwyn Capital.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Everybody, the audio is going to be better on podcast because we're in a conference hall. So this podcast with Heather Courtney will come out in about 10 days. You can go to iTunes and find it there at the Plant-Based Business Hour podcast. Thank you, everybody, to Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. I will see you all next week. Bye, everybody.